Ashley Montagu called her work a benchmark in the history of civilization. Joseph Campbell, in his foreword to The Language of the Goddess, writes of the evident relevance of her work to the universally recognized need in our time for a general transformation of consciousness. Numerous writers, scholars, and artists have been inspired by her decoding of the symbolic language of the life-affirming, nature-celebrating, earth goddess religion of the Aboriginal Europeans. The findings that Dr. Gimbutas has unearthed and documented with meticulous scholarship have revolutionary implications for our time. Her work gives us hope because she shows that we do not have to learn something new. We only need to remember that which we have tragically forgotten. Her life and career is a fascinating story in itself. Born in Lithuania in 1921, she absorbed in childhood something of the reverence for life and nature of her Baltic ancestral culture. As Europe descended into the nightmare holocaust of fascism and World War, she fled with her family from bomb raids, invasions, and total social collapse. She struggled with enormous financial hardship to pursue her education and her very independent line of research in Europe and in the United States. Settling down to a professorship at UCLA in 1963, she embarked on her archaeological and prehistorical research focused on the cultures of the Neolithic Old Europe. She has written over 200 articles and more than 10 books, including studies of the Balts, the Slavs, the Bronze Age cultures of Central and Eastern Europe, and goddesses and gods of Old Europe. Her magnum opus, The Language of the Goddess, appeared in 1989. There is something here of what Carl Jung called synchronicity, an almost uncanny coming together of individual vision and collective destiny. This year, in which Maria Gimbutas' work has gained such a wide audience in the West, is also the time in which the people of this same area of Eastern Europe that she has written about and the peoples of her own country of origin are throwing off the shackles of totalitarian oppression and peacefully moving toward a more egalitarian political structure. Please listen carefully to the words of this wise woman of the Baltic lands. She has a most important message for our time.
Ladies and gentlemen, archaeological record shows that the most ancient religion of humankind was goddess religion. I'm sorry to tell that we do not find father image in very early prehistory. Erich Neumann, an eminent psychologist, has hypothesized that it has to be a pair, ur-father and ur-mother, in the very beginning. But we do not find any material to support the hypothesis. And why? I think it's quite natural that the earlier society was a matrilineal, mother's society, and not patrilineal. And for a very long time, we do not find evidence for the understanding of the biological production of the father's role in the biological production. The copulation was not understood. Even surprisingly, in the early historic times, we still find evidence that this was a matrilineal society in old Europe, especially in the areas which were not Indo-Europeanized. Even Etruscans in Italy still mentioned that boys are mother's sons. On tombstones we have this evidence. So here we have a matrilineal society in probably the very long time of the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, which continued into the Neolithic, which is the early agricultural society. And it then continued in some areas in the Bronze Age, especially in the Minoan culture of Crete and other islands. Now, we should ask the question, if there was the goddess religion, how old was it? Do we know the beginnings? Yes, I would guess it is not 10,000 years, not 20,000, not 30,000. It's much more. We actually cannot answer today the question, when is the beginning? Maybe it is 1 million years, but this we shall leave for the future. But we can see already today that the Acheulean culture, the lower Paleolithic culture, which goes down to 500,000 and more, has produced many flint figurines, tiny figurines, which are already symbols, triangles and mother images holding babies, and also animal figures. And this is already a hope that we shall be able to decipher these early objects. But today we shall focus on the period which is the Neolithic, the early agricultural period, which started in Europe in the 7th millennium BC and continued throughout the 7th, 6th, 5th, even the 4th and 3rd millennia in some areas like Western Europe, where Neolithic started later than in the Southeast. This period is so rich, full of finds of especially sculptures and tiny figurines. I call figurines which are really miniature ones, say between 2 or 3 centimeters and 20 centimeters high. And then we have certainly sculptures, life-size sculptures of animals and even human beings, but they rarely survived. Then, in addition, in the Neolithic, there is pottery. The discovery of pottery is very important for the study of symbolism, because vases were decorated, incised or painted, and these decorations are not just geometric motifs. They are meaningful. They are symbols. They are extended symbols. In the beginning, there was a symbol, and then it was extended, and the vase was decorated around. And then there are temples, there are temple models, there are all sorts of cult objects found in temples. So all this is our basic material for the interpretation of the early religion. I would like to say that it's not only the object that is of importance, and we do not look at the object with the eyes of an art historian. It is of utmost importance to know how the object was found. Was the sculpture or figurine found in a temple? Was it found in a courtyard? Was it found in a grave or in a cave? All that counts. This cannot be omitted from our study. However, even that would not explain the functions of the goddess. To a certain degree, yes, but we need something else to add to be sure that our interpretation is right. Then we have to see what kind of goddess is portrayed. Is she nude, or is she dressed? Is she stiff, or is she with breast and belly and buttocks? And there are, of course, a variety of them. It is a tremendous variety of images. The types are numerous. It is not just one goddess that we can describe and say she portrays something. No, there are hundreds of images, but we can classify them. We can classify according to their postures. Are they sitting on a throne? Are they standing? Are they found engraved in a very stiff position? And then one more thing is, I think, decisive for the understanding or for the decipherment, what they are meaning and what are the functions. These are the incisions or paintings of symbols. And what are the symbols? I should classify them into at least three major groups. They are abstract or hieroglyphic, such symbols like a V, an M, X, Y, and others. The second group would be representational, and this includes such symbols like breasts, eyes. They are appearing on some tombs or ceramic objects, like separate symbols like eyes or breasts or buttocks or vulvas. All these are representational. And then the last category are animals. The goddess appeared as a human being, and she also appeared as an animal, a bear or deer or pig or any other animal like dog or fox or boar. And all these categories are intertwined. We cannot have borderlines between them. They are all interrelated. And this is because in ancient times, it was a different, completely different world of ideology, of thinking, when there was a very close tie between the human beings and animals and inanimate objects. And the goddess could be a tree, a stone, an animal, and a human being. So we are dealing with a holistic thinking. This was a period when we were not separated from nature. Now I would like to start with the slides, because then I can show you the categories of symbols, which are many. And we shall begin with the goddess whom I call the bird goddess. This is a sculpture about maybe 25 centimeters high, and she is a hybrid between woman. She is definitely a woman with developed breasts, has a very long cylindrical neck, and then her head is particularly interesting here because she has a beak, a protruding nose, but no mouth. She has eyes, she has a headdress, a turban maybe, or just her hair neatly combed. Then on her hand, on her right arm, there are some incisions, and they are chevrons, multiple V's. So here is one of the typical sculptures around 6000 BC or 5800 BC from Greece. I myself discovered series of such images, and if you are hesitant to admit that this is a bird goddess, well, maybe this would convince that this is a beaked creature, not a simple woman. And from the profile, she looks like this. She has, like the first one, nice hairdo, and her whole face is protruding. It's not natural, not a woman's face. So I think there is no doubt that many of such sculptures represent bird goddesses. And what is of importance, they are found in temples. I myself, excavating in Greece, northern Greece and Thessaly, have discovered numbers of bird goddesses within the temples. There were maybe 3 or 4 consecutive temples, and it was possible to count how many of them are found within the temple, and the altars, or maybe fallen down on the floor next to the altar, and not in the courtyards. So that was a clue to me that the bird goddess, also the snake goddess, were temple goddesses, and I therefore interpret them as protectresses of the house, because earliest temples of Europe, as also of Anatolia, were house-like. Archaeologists to this day discuss and dispute that these are not temples because these are houses. However, if you travel in the Aegean area and visit the islands today, you will see that the temples, the churches, are just like houses. There's maybe 3, 4 houses, and then another house, which is a church. And who takes care of these churches? Women. And this, I think, reflects the very old tradition of the Neolithic period. Women were taking care of temples. And the temples consist of 2 rooms usually. One room is the actual temple. The smaller room is the workshop. And in the workshop, we also find figurines and vases and other cult objects, which were for the preparation of the worship in the temple. Now, another aspect of the same goddess, also from my own discovery here in Macedonia. This one is from the end of the 6th millennium, the Vinča culture. And this is a big vase, about 1 meter high, decorated with chevrons, red chevrons. She has a necklace. Also, she has her special marks on the face across her cheeks, and then her beak and eyes. Usually, if there are vases, then the face appears on the neck or sometimes appears on the lid. So here we see the association of this type with a special symbol, the V or multiple V, which we can call chevron. And it will repeat throughout. Now, also, I would like to indicate that they are temple models. There are about 100 temple models discovered in Europe. Some of them are quite well preserved, as this one is also from Macedonia, not from my discoveries, but from Yugoslav excavations. And many of them have chimneys, in quotation marks, with the face of the goddess. She has a necklace spreading around the roof. This one has sort of a mouth, but I am suspecting that this was a later addition. All other chimneys, and maybe they are about 30 discovered in this site, have no mouth. Now we move, this was around the beginning of the 6th millennium, the last one. This is from the early 5th millennium, 1,000 years later, also from Yugoslavia. And, well, that can be described as a more articulate figure sitting on a throne marked with three lines, if you can see. And then she has sort of a bolero dress. She has a crown. She has 3 lines across her arms. And in front, if you can notice an apron or some, maybe it was a skirt or part of skirt, it is marked with chevrons. And then she has a duck's mask. And here is another mask, definitely a duck's mask. So the water bird played a very important role in this category of images. And even this mask is marked with V's on the corners of the forehead. The holes means that the mask was attached to the face, and some of the masks do have many holes, especially in the crown, which I interpret as holes for in decoration, for feathers maybe. So she was quite impressive, I think. There are masks of life size. In my excavations in Greece, I have discovered removable masks dating to the 7th millennium BC. So the masks have a long life. Of course, they existed even in the Paleolithic, but here we have a clear proof that in the Neolithic they were used for rituals, for reenactment of rituals, of certain rituals. The question of the beginning of this kind of symbolism associated with the bird can be seen, we can find the answer to that in some Paleolithic figurines. What you see here is a Paleolithic figurine, probably from the time between 20,000 and 14,000 BC, found in the Ukraine, which is the western part of the Soviet Union, from Mezin. This is, if you see in the middle, this is the profile, I would say it is a water bird. The upper illustration indicates an expanded extension of the symbols. And then on the left side is the front, and this is the back. Why I'm showing this? For the association of symbols. We have a supernatural triangle in front, and then on the side and the back there are chevrons, meanders, and on the neck parallel lines, and again chevrons. So this means that at least for 20,000 years the symbolic association was about the same as in the Neolithic period. And this confirms the importance of it. I think I am not making a mistake associating this group of symbols, and I am calling them aquatic symbolism associated with water birds, and especially with meanders, parallel lines, wavy lines, and so on. And the triangle, the cubic triangle, is marked with a net design. And net design is clearly associated with uterine moisture. Moisture was mysterious, and water was also sacred. Now the meanders appear on hundreds of figurines, and they have big faces and they have necklaces. These are all attributes of the same bird goddess. This is a temple model from Western Romania dating to the end of the 6th millennium BC. Then we go later into the 5th millennium. Again, we see the Meanders decorating the skirts of the goddess, and this one again is the duck goddess. She also here wears a medallion that is also typical of this kind of the goddess. I found medallions in earlier figurines of the 7th and 6th millennium BC in my excavations in Greece. And here is the head of a very nice figurine from the Vinča culture in central Yugoslavia, and her forehead is decorated with a meander, and then her eyes are very important. There are 3 lines and 2 lines around. The eyes had the importance of regeneration, the life-giving. Some of the eyes are exaggerated, supernatural, as this lid from a huge vase indicates. And then on the forehead, a chevron, double triangle. This probably represents an eared owl. Then this same goddess, whom I call bird goddess, can appear as a bird. So she can be a woman, she can be a bird. A bird wears a human mask, has a crown. This is a especially beautiful vase from the Vinča culture, dated to around 4,500 or earlier, made of very thin clay, decorated with black bands. The images like this continue for a long time. Even in the Bronze Age in Europe, they were made, like this one is from Hungary, dated to around 16th century BC, so maybe about 4,000 years later. And I would say that they are prototypes of later sirens of ancient Greece. Now we can begin the second category, which is very closely associated with the bird goddess, and this is the snake goddess. She appears as a woman, or she appears as a snake. There are many snakes found as sculptures of snakes and also painted on pottery. This is a very clear example. She is decorated with snakes. Her arms merge with the body, with the snakes, and her legs are not even shown, but her head is a snake head. This is from Anatolia, from the 6th millennium BC. Now another example from Turkey, from central Turkey, is from Haçlılar, is from the first half of the 6th millennium BC. Now you see the legs are snake coils. The arms are also probably snakes, but here you can see just like arcs, and her head is decorated with an aquatic design. Other images are simply women, but here are also hybrids. Her legs are snakes, her arms are also almost snakes, her mouth is long, her nose is not much of a woman's nose, and then she wears a crown. Crown is especially typical of snake goddesses. The crown appears in later times, like here in an example from Crete around 2000 BC. And in front we see the crown, but what is in the back are a mass of writhing snakes. This, I think, is the beginning of what we still have in folklore. In folklore, the crowned snake is very important to this day. And the crowned snake is the leader of thousands of other snakes. If she appears, then expect the other snakes to appear. Or if you touch her, the other ones will follow you. And if you happen to catch the crown and be happy and know everything and understand animal language, well, that will be also dangerous, because the other snakes will follow you for a long time. And the most beautiful snake goddesses are very well known from Knossos in Crete, dating from around 1600 BC. These are beautiful ladies, but all over the body you can see the snakes are winding up the arms, around the belly, and then the other one on the left is holding snakes in her hands. They have beautiful headdresses, the tiara, and the other has even a monkey sitting on her head. So these can be goddesses. They also can be priestesses worshipping the goddess. Now we are entering the other group of symbolism. The goddess who is creatrix, who is creating from her own body. Her body parts are life-giving. This one is a Paleolithic figurine dating from 23,000 BC, found in Les Puig in the southern part of France near the Pyrenees. I like it so much that I'm always showing it when I show slides. To some people, this is a monstrosity. To me, it is not. It is really a harmonious sculpture, and it really shows the essence of the Paleolithic art. This is a symbolic art, not a portrayal of a woman. Definitely not. Not a single sculpture or figurine portrays a woman, a simple woman. No, they are all symbols. And what we see here are breasts and buttocks. They are exaggerated, definitely. But the legs and the head and the arms are reduced, because they symbolically do not play a big role here. It was important to show the importance of breasts and buttocks. And even I would say breasts and buttocks, both are symbolically interrelated. Both are in pairs, and two is more than one. Two has more strength than one. Well, we are created that way, but also symbolically they impressed our ancestors that this was important, and therefore we have a repetition of this doubleness throughout time. Here is another example from Malta in the Mediterranean, and this is much later. And the other was 23,000, this is 3,000 BC. But again, here is the buttock symbolism of importance. And it is found in a temple. And the temple is also of the same shape with buttocks in the plan of the temple. And here I interpret the importance of such figurines for regeneration. The Maltese temples, to me, mostly mean regeneration. Although some temples, as I told you, where bird goddesses were found, this was not connected with this motif. It was protecting, it was life-giving. Here is regeneration. In some Upper Paleolithic rock engravings, hundreds of buttock figurines appear. The figures have just buttocks and cylindrical neck and nothing else. No arms, no legs. So here again, I think the regeneration motif dominated. And perhaps in the buttocks, there was an egg, the symbol of regeneration. Some other images maybe will be more clear, like this one from around the, say, first half of the 6th millennium BC, found in Yugoslavia near Belgrade. This is a seated figurine with the weight in the buttocks and nothing else. No arms, legs are also reduced, and facial features hardly exist. She has some hair, but the buttocks are egg-shaped. And some figurines like this with protruding buttocks, if they are cut in half, they are hollow. And this shape is egg-shaped. So here we have two possibilities. This is the regeneration motif, or another possibility is that this is a cosmic egg connected with the existing myth of the beginning of the world. And these myths still continue in the classical period and still continue up to the modern times. And then most of these buttock figurines are decorated in the Neolithic period with such symbols like spirals or snake coils or four-corner designs, dynamic symbols which probably enhance the life, the regeneration. And more of such are found in the Neolithic, especially in the 6th millennium BC. This one is from Hungary, and it is clearly a bird. So here I see that the buttocks figurines are, in many cases, birds, which carry perhaps a cosmic egg in the buttocks, or just an egg which is a symbol of regeneration. And then if we go to the Bronze Age, say the middle of the 2nd millennium, there are vases from the Aegean islands like Philokopi or Thera, and they show vultures or in general birds of prey with an egg inside. The left one has a red egg, and there are many, many more. Or some vases are, of course, decorated with beautiful flowers, or sprouts, which also mean regeneration. But it is interesting here to mention that the red egg is associated with the bird of prey, not with a water bird in this case. And why? Because we shall see later that the goddess of regeneration is the vulture. She is associated with death. She is killer. She is attacking human beings after death. But she is also concerned with regeneration. Then another example here is from Phaistos in the southern part of Crete, a vase which is decorated with an egg and spirals, and the vase itself is egg-shaped, and the upper part is clearly the head of a bird. And then within the bird, within the egg, there are spirals. I call such a symbol a column of life. The beginning, something is beginning or becoming. Now from the buttocks we move to the pubic triangle or to vulva. And these are the earliest symbols so far known. Vulvas and triangles are very early symbols. Some art historians decided that, well, of course, men have created the symbolism because they were the first to touch vulvas, and they had to show it. But I don't think this is the right interpretation, because our ancestors were more philosophical, and if you studied all the vulvas in existence in the Paleolithic and later, you will notice that they are always associated with sprouts, with seeds, with branches. So this is the beginning of life. This is sprouting, growing. It's not pornography. Then some of the very early figurines, this is again 23 to 21,000 BC from southern France, from Montpensier. It's a monstrous figurine. Well, some scholars describe such figurines as monstrosities because the vulva is supernatural, it's swollen. Buttocks are also not natural. Belly is also too large. So what is it? And this is a very tiny figurine, very small one. And there are many of them like this. So what is it? I think the important is the life-giving, the birth-giving. Probably the birth-giving is emphasized. And the same thing, the swollen vulva in association with the buttocks on the other side continues for, say, 15 to 20,000 years. I just will show another example, which is from 3,500 BC. And this is from Hungary. And we see the same thing, a swollen vulva on the one side, the buttocks on the other. This is a handle of a vase. And here is a very good example from Italy, a bone plate figurine, incised, and the vulva is associated with a fir tree, and then on her breast there is a crescent, again a symbol of regeneration. Then there are many figurines which I call birth-giving, and they are associated with the goddess who is the life-bringer, birth-giving. This is from my own excavations dating to the 6,300 BC in Thessaly, northern Greece. She is portrayed in a natural birth-giving posture. The birth-giving posture in prehistory was in a seated position. There are no others. And also in the Paleolithic, some of these types are dated to 20,000, 21,000 in France. There are such found and dated by radiocarbon dating. And also they continue into later times. This is from Malta, from a temple. Was described originally as a pathological figurine, although I think this is a clearly birth-giving posture. Swollen vulva. Then on her back there are 9 lines, perhaps associated with 9 months of gestation. And the hands are perhaps typical of birth-giving posture. Well, from the birth-giving, we move to protection of new life. There are many Madonnas discovered in the Neolithic period. They are not known from very early times, but they are beginning around 5,000 and then continue for several millennia. So the Madonna, the mother holding child, is not beginning with Christian Mary much earlier. However, the difference is that the life protection belongs more or less to the animal mother. Most of these images have masks which are either birds or bears. So perhaps it comes from the observation that the bear mother was a very good mother, and also the birds take care of their young little birds. So this one is an example of the bird mother holding a little bird. Both are masked. Then there are images of bear masked nurses. I call them nurses. They are taking care of babies, and they have on the back pouches. So probably they were carrying babies in pouches. And the mask, I think you can notice this. There is no certainty, but I think it is a bear mask. And there are other images I am not showing today, real bears holding babies. And this belief in mother bear still continues. In my own country, in Lithuania, the expecting mother was called Bear, the little bear. She's coming. Well, there was like a formula said when the expecting mother was approaching to the sauna, for instance. Oh, the group of women said, "Oh, here the bear is coming," or the newborn baby was laid on the bear fur. Then even in Crete, and this is surprising because now we do not find any bears anymore in the Mediterranean area, but in the western part of Greece, to this century, to the middle of this century, there was a celebration on the 2nd of February of the bear mother. And it is described, this is not Mary, but the bear mother, although it is a Christian country. Now, let us go again into another class of symbols, the fertility and multiplication. For a long time, the Venuses, so-called Venuses, and, well, the Paleolithic Madonnas were called, fertility goddesses. So neither the term fertility goddess nor Venus is a good term, because this is a misunderstanding. This is only one category of sculptures that can be associated with fertility. Of course, it exists, and many of the figurines or sculptures are associated with fertility, but not all of them. And Venus, of course, is a beauty. Venus is a wife or a bride, but not a birth-giving or life-giving. So here is one of the very early images from the Paleolithic, again from southern France, from Loselle. This is a pregnant woman holding her hand on the pregnant belly and holding a crescent or a horn in another hand. So therefore, I would say she is concerned with fertility, with multiplication, with bounty. And particularly because we have the continuity of the same image in the Neolithic period. Here we have a clearly pregnant woman with very prominent belly, and then under it the supernatural triangle. from Neolithic Greece, from around 6,000 or somewhat later BC. In those days, probably it was important to show the image of a pregnant woman, because at that time, when agriculture was just in the beginning, for say 500 years or so before before it started, it was of enormous concern, the earth's fertility, and the production of such pregnant images enhanced the earth's fertility. But not only earth fertility, fertility of animals, fertility of human beings. As I said, there was no separation between earth, animal, or human being. And what else I would have to add here in my own excavations, the pregnant goddesses were found not in temples, but in courtyards next to the bread ovens. So she also can be called the bread mother. She, the one who secures the bread. And such images are not identical everywhere. Here is also a pregnant figure from eastern Romania, from the Hamangia culture. And of course the style is different, but it very probably portrays the same image. And then if we go into a later period, around 4000 BC, here is an example from Romania again, from northeast Romania, the Cucuteni culture, of an open shrine where the goddess is seated and she is flanked by young figures, probably portraying a ritual, dancers or something like that. And then in front of her there was a hall for libations. And if we know the traditions of European peasants, there were libations for Mother Earth up to the 19th, 20th century. Now, I know that we have to rush to the other half of our lecture, and I'm starting now the symbols of death. First of all, the vultures. Vultures, owls, crows, ravens. One of the best examples comes from the temples of Çatalhöyük from the 7th millennium BC, painted on the walls of shrines. Here are 7 or so vultures attacking bodies. They're already headless, so presumably the heads were removed before, immediately after death, and then the rest of the body was left for the excarnation, for the birds. And the skulls are found in other shrines placed under the heads of the bull, and we already know that the bull, the head of the bull is the uterus, so this is for the regeneration. The skull was the most important part of the body, the seat of the soul, and they always had attention. Now other images are owl images. For instance, this is a painting in charcoal found near Paris in a hypogeum, which is a subterranean tomb. She has again a necklace, she has breasts. These are her attributes, and it's clearly an owl. And owl images appear all over Western Europe, as also in the Aegean area, in Central Europe and Northern Europe. Here is one example from the famous tomb in Ireland, from Nath. It was found engraved on a stela near the chamber. So this was a long corridor going into the middle of the mount, and this was an engraving near the chamber. The date is around 3500 BC. Then I would like to compare that with another this is from Bulgaria, probably an owl image, also decorated with such an labyrinthine design, which probably are intestines, and I think symbolically they are life-giving. And here are owls as vases, as urns. One is from Troy, the other is from Polyocne, having wings, and clearly owls. But what is here interesting, that they are not really death symbols. They are associated with vulvas and with umbilical cords or snakes. So there was never in the Neolithic period produced a death symbol without any other attribute indicating regeneration. Death alone was not shown, always in association with regeneration. Even if this symbol is bone, simple bone, they are found in graves, but the bone has owl eyes. And the eyes are symbols of regeneration. They have moisture, and this moisture is regenerating. Now we move to Sardinia. This is a plan of a rock-cut tomb from the 5th millennium BC. There is a figurine in front of the skeleton, right in front of the chest, next to the vases, and some of the vases were decorated with regeneration symbols, and there was one dish in which shells were found with red ochre. So this is a series of symbols of regeneration. And here in detail, this is the figurine found in this grave. It is quite another type. It's a stiff woman. I call this series of figurines stiff nudes. And they are found in graves, and they continue through millennia. This is the 5th millennium, when they are not very slim like later on, but anyway, they are stiff. And here we switch to the period which is the end of the 5th millennium, beginning of the 4th, of alabaster, also from Sardinia. This is a well-known image, liked by many authors, and we can find them on the covers and so on. But what does it mean? Well, the white color I mentioned is color of death. And therefore they were produced of alabaster, of marble, of bone plates, and also of light colored stones. So here the stiffness is reaching the culmination. It's a very abstract figurine. The lower part is just a cone. The arms are always this way, and then the head is featureless. But sometimes the heads are shown with masks. And later figurines like this one, also from Sardinia, has a round head, which is a round mask. And again, the lower part is suppressed entirely. The hands are the same. And then the same image continues in the Aegean area in the Cyclades. These are probably the best known in literature and to the art historians, and they were considered for a long time as the ideals of beauty and never interpreted as death symbols. And they are, in my understanding, the goddess of death, leading the dead man to the underworld. However, they are also concerned with regeneration because in most cases the supernatural triangle appears on these figurines. From the Aegean area we switch now the geographical region, and this one is from Bulgaria, and I would say that they differ a little bit, although they are also stiff and they are also nudes. The head is here broad and the mouth is long, and there are some dots, maybe fangs of a poisonous snake. I would connect this series with poisonous snake, whereas the other series in Cyclades and Sardinia with the bird of prey. And even life-size masks are found in graves. This is a very interesting discovery from the 70s in Varna, which is East Bulgaria, right at the Black Sea coast. In this cemetery, they were found at least 3 well-preserved life-size masks of clay decorated with gold. In this cemetery, about 3,000 pieces or more of gold were found. So here is the same image as I have shown you before, with broad faces, large, long mouth, and some dots or here are like pins under the mouth, are perhaps teeth. And then round eyes, typical of the snake. And I would say these are the precursors of the later Gorgon heads and Pandora, maybe, in Greek mythology. Now, the next image in the series of regeneration is the frog. Again, the best representations are found in relief in Çatalhöyük shrines in Anatolia from the 7th millennium BC. She is portrayed on the wall with upraised hands, upraised legs, and next to the horns or bull heads, and next to live columns painted on walls. Sometimes such figures are covered with geometric motifs, which looks like honeycomb, but also there are columns of lozenges and also a concentric design on her belly, which is a symbol of regeneration. Here is from my own excavations from Achilleon in northern Greece, dated to 6,300, carved out of black stone, and I call this type the frog woman. And the frog symbol is long-lasting, of course, you know from folklore. And here I would like to show from Lithuania a tombstone, which from the cemetery I visited myself, still in this century, a frog with a head in the shape of a lily. And this little figurine is from Greece, from 6000 BC, also has the head in the shape of a lily. So the frog is associated with flowers, with buds, with sprouts. And originally, of course, the frog probably was associated with fetus, with uterus. And the image is as old as the Upper Paleolithic, some 20,000 to 30,000 years ago. The other image, which belongs to the regeneration class and uterine images, is a hedgehog. And hedgehog originally probably was associated with the animal uterus, which has warts. So this is one possibility. Maybe I'm wrong, but it could be. And then linguistically, it is also proved, because in German language, eagle is hedgehog, and eagle is also uterus. Eagle, carp, and so on. So there are contexts. Here is a lid in the shape of a hedgehog and the face of God, a goddess, the hedgehog goddess. The association between the hedgehog regeneration is seen in the later cemeteries. For instance, this vase is from Rhodos, dated to the 8th century BC, in the shape of a hedgehog, in which a skeleton of an infant was discovered. And even in 20th century cemeteries in Austria or Bavaria, the images of hedgehogs or red balls with spikes were laid by women who had uterine problems. Or also such are brought to churches as votive offerings for the same purpose. Now, this is a fish, and found in Lepenski Vir. This is a sculpture of about 50 centimeters high, of stone, egg-shaped, and painted in red, and decorated with a labyrinthine design. In this place, which is called Lepenski Vir in northern Yugoslavia, there were found over 50 shrines, triangular in shape, having red floors, and in the inside there was an altar, and at the end of the altar there was a sculpture. And most of these sculptures were either egg-shaped or fish-shaped, or these fish-shaped sculptures have also features of a woman. Next, we'll show you in detail the decoration of the sculpture, which is the labyrinthine design, and labyrinthine design to me is the symbol of regeneration. Her mouth is clearly fish mouth, but eyes and nose can be interpreted as human. Now, one more sculpture which clearly is egg-shaped and having fish attributes, especially the mouth, and eyes are protruding round. They're all of stone, found in the Danube. This site is located right on the bank of the Danube. One more of the series, which is extremely important because here I see the combination of fish, woman, and vulture. The hands of this fish lady are vulture hands. These are claws. So here is a typical combination in the Neolithic art, in the symbolism, the combination of several classes of woman, of animal, and bird in one. And then another example, this is from the other part of Europe, which would indicate almost about the same thing. Her hands here are with 3 fingers. I think these are not human hands, but vulture claws. The rest, well, she has a V and well, round eyes, maybe are fish eyes, and the mouth is very peculiar here. This is a 52 centimeters high stone figure from France, dated from the first half of the 5th millennium BC. And the Lepenski sculptures date from around 6000 BC, all these egg-shaped fish sculptures. Now, in addition to all these fetuses or uterine symbols, the other regeneration symbols are triangles or double triangles. They feature in the tomb architecture, especially in Ireland. We find very good examples. Here is a triangular cairn, if you can see it, and stones, and then if this is removed, then a tomb is found as a round chamber with a corridor. And in architecture, I interpret these also as vagina and uterus coming back to the womb. Tomb and womb are related. The old Europeans didn't build houses for their dead to continue the same life as the Indo-Europeans did. They understood that life continues in the same way. The old Europeans didn't. They returned their dead to the womb or to their ancestors. The megaliths of Western Europe have collective communal burials in them, and the bones are mixed up. The bodies were excarnated, and then at certain times the bones are collected and put in the tomb. The individuality didn't matter. Whereas in the later culture, in the patriarchal culture, the hero, the individual, the glory of the person was most important, but not in this period. Some of the plans of the graves are definitely anthropomorphic, probably portraying the goddess herself. And now here is the symbol of double triangle, or say hourglass shaped. And this definitely is the goddess of regeneration with vulture claws instead of human hands. That is a vase from the Cucutaen culture dated to 4000 BC. Cucutaen culture is northeast Romania. And here is an incision on a vase from Hungary from around 5000 BC. Also, if you see, her hands are not human. She's very abstract, very an image containing series of symbols. And then her head is just 3 lines. This is the next image where we see the combination of this goddess of two triangles incised on the head of a bull. This is a bone plate figure, and it's a beautiful combination of the goddess of regeneration and the head of a bull, dated to around 4000 BC. The symbolism will continue in the later times, especially in the Minoan culture, where we have many bull heads, bulls, and so-called sacred horns. The symbol of sacred horns begins much earlier than in Crete. Actually, it begins in Çatalhöyük, or even earlier in the 7th millennium or before. And here are some examples from the Çatalhöyük shrine, where 3 bull heads are portrayed on one wall of the shrine with a labyrinthine design on top. And then below there are hands. And hands probably were symbols of the goddess's hands. Her presence or her power was there. And the bulls were here for regeneration. Then there are vases decorated with bull heads, and the design usually is a whirling pattern, snakes, S-shaped spirals turning around. So these are enhancing, stimulating life powers. The bull head usually appears at the entrance of tombs. Here are examples from Sardinia, where above the entrance there is a bull head in relief, and then inside the design on the walls of the inside of the tomb, this is a subterranean tomb, also bull horns. Sometimes they appear in 2 and 3s, many, maybe 10 of them are found in one tomb. And I shall finish now with the Minoan sacred horns, which are celebrated symbols, are very well known. And who is now coming up here? Who is in the middle between the horns? In literature, you can find a description that this is a symbol of a double X. Well, it is not a big mistake, but I could also call this a butterfly. But the X was also a symbol of the goddess, because the X was triangular, and X's are portrayed throughout as symbols of the goddess. And if you have the image of the goddess of regeneration in the shape of an hourglass, you turn it sideways, horizontally, you have a butterfly. And she was a butterfly, and she was a woman, and she was an axe. And then also double X. But later on, in the 2nd millennium, when the Indo-Europeans arrived in Crete, well, then probably this symbol was transformed into an X, a double X. And there are still several slides left to indicate what is portrayed on sarcophagi of Crete from around the 14th, 13th centuries BC. Still the same symbolism continues. This is life-enhancing, actually. Shells and horns and butterflies growing from the head of a bull, and flowers. So it is quite logical that you portray something on a sarcophagus which enhances life and promotes regeneration. But sometimes this so-called double X is for sure a butterfly. And this is an example from a seal from Zakros, which is eastern Crete. And this is a clear goddess with the wings of a butterfly. And this is an eyed butterfly. But the goddess, well, she is a woman. She has a crown, but her legs are not human. Maybe she has bull legs, maybe another animal, but probably bull or vultures. Difficult to decide. And then in my last slide, I shall show you that she can be also a bull. The goddess can be a bull. This one has a head, which is a vulture's head, with enormous horns, and then there are crescents next to that. So here we have a combination of symbols which we already have seen before. The bull or the bull head is the uterus. The vulture is the symbol of goddess of death and regeneration. And then we have crescents, of course, and horns, which are also symbols of regeneration. Definitely the symbols of regeneration predominate throughout. Now I'm willing to answer your questions if you have any.
Could you say something about what happened to the old goddess culture? What was the takeover by the Indo-Europeans? How did that come about? What were the changes that occurred?
My hypothesis is that the old European culture was partially destroyed by the invaders from the east. I call them the Kurgan people, the horse-riding warriors. They started in the Volga region of South Russia. Their culture, about the same time when the old European culture was flourishing, their culture was also already food-producing, pastoral and agricultural, but of a very different type. They were cattle breeders, and they have domesticated the horse sometime in the 6th millennium, or maybe even earlier. We don't know that. But then, in the 5th millennium, they were very mobile because of the horse. And they came to the borders of old Europe. And here they saw this beautiful culture and meadows along the Danube in East Hungary, in Bulgaria, and Macedonia. And we have the first incursion of these half-nomadic people into Europe at the end of the 5th millennium BC. Since then, the trouble started. And this I call the first wave. But then about 600 or 700 years later, there was another wave. And then around 3000 or early 3rd millennium, the third wave. So we have now a transformation of the European culture from the matrilinear or matristic or matriarchal, if you like, to a patriarchal, patrilinear. It took a long time, and it was a gradual thing. It was in the beginning only East Central Europe which was transformed. The western part of Europe, the Mediterranean part of Europe, was not touched at all until the 3rd millennium BC. Western part of Europe was still flourishing. The megaliths were built there, and so, although there are traces of Indo-Europeans even in Ireland in about the middle of the 4th millennium BC, but they had not much influence. So it is, I would say, a development of almost 2,000 years in dates from 4,300 to 2800 BC. This is the period of the incursions of the people from the east. European culture is like a layer cake composed of the two very different ideologies, very different religions, very different social structures. And we are the heirs of the two cultures, not one. Every European culture is a hybrid culture. And it is, to my belief, very wrong to think that the European agricultural culture, old European goddess culture, was in the European, as it was proposed by Colin Renfrew, my good colleague, in 1987, his book, Archaeology and Language. This is a misunderstanding. The old European culture cannot be Indo-European, because we can reconstruct the early Indo-European culture if we use linguistic evidence and mythology. And this is, my book, I think, shows that this is a non-Indo-European culture, an earth-loving, art-loving culture. The Indo-European culture is a completely different culture, representing a different ideology in every aspect of culture.
You've shown us several different goddesses, and I'm wondering, do you see this as one goddess with a number of different forms, or several goddesses who somehow are together representing natural forces and doing things in consort?
Yes, you have asked a very serious question, I would say, and it is difficult to say. Well, one thing is clear: there are many goddesses, there are many types of goddesses. It's clear from the very beginning, from at least the Upper Paleolithic, when we start to have the sculptures and also cave art. Now, is this one goddess with many functions, many postures? I would tend to say yes, and therefore I would like to call her the great goddess. However, maybe this answer is not for the whole of the history of humankind, because perhaps some of the images started in a different way. I would classify into two groups. The bird and snake could originate as totemic animals, and from the Upper Paleolithic or even earlier were serving as protectresses of the family and ensuring the life powers. And the other class would be this goddess who creates from herself. And therefore we have so many of her body parts represented. So these could be two lines which later merged, because later on we cannot distinguish very clearly between the bird goddess or snake goddess and the other goddesses and her functions. They are polyvalent symbols. And they are, for instance, the snake is the symbol of life power, and symbol of regeneration. And therefore their functions are here and are there. So it is almost impossible to say. But I only speak about the possibility of several images developing from one thought, the others from another.
Could you comment briefly on the ancient religions of other cultures around the world? And in particular, I'm curious if goddess worship is characteristic of a number of ancient religions.
Yes, certainly. The goddess religion was universal. In all parts of the world, we find the goddess before the patriarchal stage. And there are similarities between them, although I think if we want to decipher the meaning, the functions of the goddess, we have to concentrate on one area which is rich in sculptural art or say painted pottery and others like Europe. And then we can be certain that we can understand the symbolism. Although in general, no question, there are similarities between Africa and Europe and the Near East and Americas. Indian art, of course, has very, very much similarities to European images. In China, of course, also before the patriarchal period was a goddess religion. Southeast Asia is full of images which are almost identical. The pottery is so similar that it can be confused with what is in say, Romania or Hungary and in Indonesia.
Maria, I'm not sure you're aware, but over the last 20 years or so, the rediscovery of the goddess has been the catalyst for a vast new religious movement, which is being regarded as the fastest growing religious movement in America today, the religion of the living goddess. I would wonder if you might have any comments about this new movement, the resurgence of goddess worship, and a projection of how you see that for the future.
Why it was in the past so slow and why it is so fast now, yes? It's interesting. Well, of course, one thing is the feminist movement, and women are helping to spread the idea, that is clear. And another is that the material became ripe for interpretation. There is so much that I always question, how come that for so long nobody really touched the question of symbolism or types of goddesses? There of course, is a lot written before me and about Near Eastern goddesses and others, but this analysis of types and symbols was not done. So why? Well, perhaps someone like me who was interested in interdisciplinary studies had to appear to connect what is known in mythology, in Indo-European studies, in history of religions, in archaeology, in linguistics, and pull all the cords together. It needs an interdisciplinary view, otherwise it is difficult to understand. All of my colleagues are not interested in figurines or sculptures or religion in general. They just discard. This is no interest, no interpretation. Better not do it, because you will not be a scientist.
What impact in the world? How would this affect the
right
world?
Now? Right. Well, I think we reached the end of the world and we are starting to create another.
Right.
Well, I expect we shall become a healthier society. We shall worship the earth, well, not in the same way. Nothing returns from the past. We cannot repeat the whole thing from the beginning. We can only transform ourselves and use our knowledge about the past and apply it for the creating the future. This is my feeling.
In other talks, I've heard you talk about the fact that the old goddess cultures that you've been speaking about did not know warfare. They didn't have weapons. The invention of warfare was really an invention of the patriarchal sky god cultures that came later. Could you just briefly outline the evidence for that and how you view that story?
Yes, it is true. This culture is a peaceful culture. We have no weapons except for hunting. Arrowheads exist, and even 1 or 2 daggers have been found, but these are not for warfare. Whereas in the East, the Kurgan culture produced formidable daggers around, say, 5000 BC and later. And then from the daggers, swords developed, and then they had spears and other weapons. Whereas in Europe, we do not have weapons until the appearance of the warriors. Then after that, of course, the culture was transformed and the weapons appeared, together with the specific type of metallurgy which appeared in Europe at the end of the 4th millennium, or the second half of the 4th millennium. The metal was, well, what we can call now bronze, but it was first arsenic and copper, and this was a hard metal. The metal used before by all the Europeans was a soft metal. It was copper and gold. And from that kind of metal, you could not produce weapons. And the most important evidence for a peaceful culture is the location of habitation sites. They chose the best, the beautiful areas. They didn't even think of enemies. They didn't have to climb up the hills. They didn't have to fortify their settlements with stone walls. If they fortified, it was just a trench or some palisade against the wild animals, maybe. That was all.
Maria, is there any evidence that you can use to get an idea of what the balance between male and female was in the family and in society in old Europe?
Well, we can reconstruct something. Of course, not the whole picture, because it's in archaeological records, it's difficult to find such a good evidence for that. Well, we can use settlements, we can use cemeteries, we can use frescoes and other sources. I would say it's important to see what happened in Crete, in Terra, in the Bronze Age, and there we have so many frescoes that we can reconstruct the society. And this is a balanced society with a woman as a priestess on the top and as a queen. And I think it's no doubt that the Minoan culture had a queen, and her brother maybe was very important for trade and navigation. And I would then go back and see from the settlement and cemetery evidence in Europe of the 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd millennia that there was a balanced society where men were important. They were overseeing trade and perhaps architecture, building, shipbuilding, navigation, tool making. In their graves, always there appear trade objects. Whereas in important female graves, the cult objects, symbols appear. Also, in many areas of Europe have been found women's graves which were well, very important in the sense that the whole mound, long mound, was on top of a single woman. Such appear in Poland, for instance, in a so-called funnel neck beaker culture. In Hungary, there are found graves where models of temples were found in women's graves. So there is a lot of evidence which shows that the woman is connected with the temple. She is important in the religious movement. She is the overseer of the temple. And this was actually a theocracy or theocracy, where women were the leaders of religious life. But then men also served in rituals, judging from Terran frescoes where there are processions of men or men bringing gifts to the goddess, carrying fish from their fishing, bringing to the goddess. So that, in other words, I would agree with Rihanna Eisler's term Gilani or Gilani, composed of Gi and An, woman and man, and L in the middle, linking the two sexes. However, maybe in the very beginning there was not a real balanced society. I think the woman was more important because of the goddess. And because the mother was really very important. And the father was just a consort. And the brother of the family took care of the children, probably. He was the important, and the linguistic evidence shows it. The brother of the mother is always in this non-Indo-European remnants of the language. Well, I think what I have shown to you in my slides and said, it is a part of what is possible to say about the goddess religion of old Europe, which existed before the Indo-Europeans. I identify this term with a non-Indo-European culture, not Indo-Europeans. This was a goddess civilization, I would dare to say, because it reached a culmination around the 5th and 4th millennia BC, and I don't agree with the definition of the civilization, that the civilization begins with the warriors in Europe with the production of weapons and building of hill forts. I think this is an ideal culture, a peaceful, stable, long-lasting civilization from which we can learn a lot.